Good evening. I'm going to get the show on the road tonight. Welcome to the second program in the 24th season of Talking Opera this year. My name is Kathy Isley, and I'm chair of the Education and Community Engagement Committee. And again, I thank the staff of the Fenimore Museum for being so hospitable, and especially Kevin, because he's made such a really nice recording of our program last week that I've already got a compliment on it. And I thank the donor who made it possible for us to have all of our programs this season at the museum, so you don't have to figure out where to go next week. As I introduce tonight's speaker, who is conductor James Lowe, I want to emphasize that it's impossible whenever I introduce these speakers to give a full account of their backgrounds and experience, unless I were to take away a lot from his presentation. But here are a few things that caught my attention. First, Jim has been at Glimmerglass before, and I knew it because I remembered that he had conducted the first season of Oklahoma when Francesca did it, but I didn't remember a lot of the other stuff. Showboat in 22, Sound of Music, Sound of Music, I'm not sure which years these are, okay. And then those of us who attended Glimmerglass on the Grass, do you remember Songbird? Okay, well, this guy not only conducted in the theater while it was being performed outside, but he also arranged Offenbach's music to give it that kind of jazzy New Orleans style. And the piece continues to be performed right this season. Yep. Since our speakers are all conductors, I became curious about the path that an individual takes to become a maestro, or teacher, master. Jim told me that his musical training was as a pianist, some of it at the Eastman School of Music, not far from here. He started as a studio artist at the Houston Grand Opera, then joined the music staff as a pianist, coach, and assistant conductor. Now, think about the high level of piano skills that somebody needs, because when you have the orchestra score kind of condensed to a piano score, you try to put in all the notes that 10 fingers can manage. So he had to have a lot of skill to do that. And I know this because I talk to some of the resident artists every now and then at Glimmerglass, and I just appreciate what skill they had. But then, supporting the vocalist and doing it the way the conductor wants it done. But then he gradually started getting opportunities to do some conducting at Houston Grand Opera, and started being able to lead some of his own productions, and then became more of a freelance conductor. He has been on Broadway to various opera companies in the United States and across the ocean. He's been on the concert stage and in recording studios, sometimes accompanying artists who are performing music he's arranged. And then I found this little curious thing in his biography. He knows what it is to be a vocal performer because he's been the lead singer in a rock band.
I can see that. I can see that.
It was a few years ago. But anyway, here's James Lowe to tell us about Oklahoma.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was the lead screamer of, I like to refer to myself as a vocal stylist. I wasn't really much of a singer, but it was a good way to spend my 20s, playing in a band called Backwash. So now it's a completely different life. As she mentioned, this is my 6th summer here at Glimmerglass. I think the only show you forgot was Camelot. I did Camelot 150 years ago here. That was my first show. And, it's just such an amazing place to spend the summer, you know, to get to come up here, first of all, to work with these world-class singers and orchestra musicians and, you know, technicians and artists and everybody that comes here to kind of work in this beautiful environment, in that great theater. And it really feels like just a home, a great place to really spend the summer. And in my case, I have a son who right now is 16. He has been here every summer and kind of has grown up here on the lake. You know, we live in New York City, so he gets to come here and feel like he has a little bit of a respite from Manhattan. And he has been in 3 youth operas, and I think he will be in Robin Hood this summer. So we're very excited about that. Talking about Rodgers and Hammerstein, really the first thing to talk about is Rodgers and Hammerstein were both already legends by the time they got together to do Oklahoma. Oklahoma was their first show as collaborators. Rodgers had famously worked for many years with Lorenz Hart, and Rodgers and Hart, believe it or not, wrote 28 shows together. It's hard to believe that you could write 28 shows and that would be the first chapter of your life before you moved on to other things. With Hart, he wrote Connecticut Yankee, Babes in Arms, Boys from Syracuse, Pal Joey, and many of the songs from that era are obviously standards today, like My Funny Valentine, The Lady is a Tramp, Blue Moon. There was quite a history to Richard Rodgers' musical life at that time. Oscar Hammerstein was also a legend by this time. He had written, of course, the lyrics to Showboat, among many other things, operettas, pieces with Jerome Kern. And Hammerstein was actually much older. We'll talk about that a little bit in a little bit. Richard Rodgers was the kind of composer who preferred to write the music if lyrics were already existing, right? His belief was that I like to be inspired by words. I like to be inspired by the poetry that a lyricist comes up with. For 28 shows, he did not have that luxury. He had to write the music first. So he was kind of working in a way that was counter to his creative desire. The reason for that was that Lorenz Hart was famously irresponsible and a drinker and did not get his work done on time. So Richard Rodgers learned early on that if he was going to get his shows done, he would just have to write music, and then Lorenz Hart, who was a genius, was able to kind of craft his lyrics to fit into these existing phrases and forms and rhythms. He would kind of retrofit words to fit, and it's kind of unbelievable to think that some of those songs that are so brilliant happened that way. There is a movie that just came out last year, if you have not seen it, called Blue Moon, with Ethan Hawke playing Lorenz Hart, and it actually takes place on opening night of Oklahoma, which is the last few weeks of Lorenz Hart's life. And there's a lot of kind of angst that Lorenz Hart deals with of not being chosen to write Oklahoma, right? Not being involved, that basically Richard Rodgers had finally had enough and said, I'm not going to work with you anymore because you're not responsible enough and you're not able, I want to create with someone else. And he chose to work with somewhat of a legend and a much older writer, which to some people I think at the time was maybe questioned. Like, was this the right decision to choose this kind of, why wouldn't you want to write with the new young upstart, whoever that might be, right? And, but clearly Rodgers made the right choice, right? With Hammerstein, what happened was that the lyrics and the book came first. And this shifted the entire process for Richard Rodgers, because suddenly he was able to be inspired by the poetry, by the form, by the rhythm of the words. So the process looks something like this. Rodgers and Hammerstein would sit the story goes, around a tree at Oscar Hammerstein's house in the country for hours and weeks and months, and they would just sit and like talk about who is this character Laurie, who is this character Curly, who is Judd, who are Will and Ado Annie, and how do they sing? What is their what are they feeling? What are they? And so the point is that they would talk about it so much and kind of refine just the words without a single note of music being thought of, that Richard Rodgers has said that when they worked in that process, that when he finally went to write the music for a song, sometimes he would sit down and it would be done in 10 minutes because he knew where to go, right? He just knew what to do. There is a great quote from Richard Rodgers where he says, quote, "No melodies are running around in my head. A song almost never occurs to me spontaneously. What I have to say is essentially musical, but it isn't simply melody for melody's sake. My big involvement is with the characters. I must know how they feel, and then I can give them a song to express it." So you can see that Fortune was having to fight against this instinct and create music, and here he finally had the freedom. And you really hear the difference, right? There's a kind of soaring quality to the Rodgers and Hammerstein shows that is very different than the kind of more jazz-driven, energetic shows with heart. So I'm going to play a bunch of little things here, but first, a perfect example of this is the opening song, "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning." And "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning," if you think about it, you can imagine how it kind of wrote itself, right? If Hammerstein presented you with lyrics that said, "Oh, what a beautiful morning, oh, what a beautiful day, I got a beautiful feeling, everything's going my way." First of all, incredibly simple and yet so poetic, and it just sets the scene for the entire show. The first question is, well, what would the meter be? Well, there's no question that you're going to write, "Oh, what a beautiful morning," right? Which is what he did. He wrote this waltz, and you can hear that the melody kind of lended itself too. And it's probably an example of one of the songs maybe he wrote in 10 minutes. I don't know. There's a little intro here. So right about here, Curly will start singing the verse. It's completely a cappella.
There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. The corn is as high as an elephant's eye. And it looks like it's climbing clear up to the sky. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I got a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way.
Now, I happen to have been lucky enough to see the original manuscript in his handwriting of this song. I was working with the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization, and they had in their files this original copy. And what was interesting is the original melody in Rodgers' pencil handwriting was not what you just heard. Instead of, "Oh," and forgive my horrible singing, I told you, I'm vocal stylist, I'm not a singer. "Oh, what a beautiful morning," right? Which is what we all know now. The original on that piece of paper was, "Oh, what a beautiful morning." And you can see how he would have first come up with that, because your first thought is you look at this thing and you think, okay, it's a waltz. Oh, what a beautiful morning, right? And they probably worked with that for a while, right? I mean, that's how composers work. They kind of come up with a rough draft. But what's amazing is that just by that turn, instead of jumping back up, oh, what a beautiful, to have it go, oh, what a beautiful morning, suddenly it soars, right? Suddenly it's like, it's romantic, it's a cowboy that's confident. To me, even the melody looks like a rolling hill, right? Oh, what a beautiful morning. Like it looks like the landscape, right? And they were able to paint that picture in the first, 10 seconds of the show and say so much. So that brings us to what I want to talk about the groundbreaking nature of Oklahoma. We talk about in the musical theater world really shows before Oklahoma and shows after Oklahoma. Oklahoma was really a game changer in Broadway for many, many reasons. Obviously, there are a couple other shows that we consider to be that way. One would be Showboat. Showboat really was considered kind of the first musical. And then the next in that line, by the way, Showboat in the 20s, 26, something like that. Then in 1934, a little bit later on, was Porgy and Bess, which was another kind of moment in musical history. But 1943 is Oklahoma. You can see there's actually not that much time difference between those shows. If you think about it, if you were living at that time, you would have seen the kind of progression happen pretty quickly. What Oklahoma did that was so revolutionary was it kind of changed the way that musicals told stories. Musicals before then were most of the time were kind of show production reviews with dancing girls, big production values, right? And the first thing that Oklahoma audiences saw when they sat down after the overture was a woman, older woman, churning butter on stage, and a voice, what you just heard, a cappella from off stage, all alone, just, there's a bright golden haze on the meadow, right? Just coming from a distance. And I'm sure that felt like to audiences, I'm sorry, what? Because every other show up until that time opened with a giant production number. And, the first critics that saw the out-of-town version of Oklahoma while they were working it out of town, the famous critic quote was, "No legs, no jokes, no chance." That this show wasn't going to go anywhere because who wants to see, an old lady churning butter and a bunch of cowboys singing, right? But a couple other things that were so unique was that the acting was as important, if not more important, than the singing and the dancing. That up to that time, singing and dancing was really so important. Still dance. Agnes DeMille did the choreography. There's a ballet, right? I mean, it's not to take away from the dance, but the idea that the acting became more important. The plot had some very dark elements. There's a very serious side to Oklahoma. There might be a death in Oklahoma, but I don't want to spoil, no spoilers. I mean, it was 1943 if you haven't seen it by now. But one of my favorite things about the show is the way it moves from dialogue into song. And this was a really revolutionary, generally what happened in musicals up to this point, and I've conducted many of them, and it can be very tricky. The actors are doing a scene, they deliver their dialogue, and they get to the last line, and then the orchestra starts an introduction. And you have da 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 dun 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 da dun dun, and then they sing a song. What happens during that introduction? Nothing, right? The actors have finished their lines. Now they stand and wait. There's a little intro, and then they sing, right? Now the intro does serve a certain purpose. It serves the purpose of giving the singer the pitch, giving the singer the rhythm. So how was Rodgers and Hammerstein going to change this into making it more cinematic, more like a movie where you finish your dialogue, and then you start singing, right? And so what they did, one of the many ways that they did this, is shown in the song Kansas City, which Will Parker sings. You're going to notice that it starts right on the song. There's no introduction at all. And actually, the actor speaks the first couple of lines. So just listen to this.
I got to Kansas City on a Friday. By Saturday, I learned a thing or two.
Now he's
For up to then, I didn't have an idea of what the modern world was coming to.
So what was so revolutionary about that was the idea that he didn't need to get the pitch because he was going to speak the line. It was almost like there were three ways to deliver information to the audience. One is speaking, one is singing, but then there's a bridge, which is kind of like speaking in rhythm, kind of like speak singing. And so you can imagine for an actor what a wonderful thing that is, because what happens just before he says that is he's speaking lines. In fact, the line is, let's see if I can remember it, because we were just rehearsing it 4 hours ago. It should be in my brain, is I don't know if I did. I don't know if I was carrying on, but I sure did see some things there that I never seen before. I got to Kansas City on a Friday, right? You can see how, as an actor, that just allows you to just move from dialogue into song and then back into the dialogue again with zero stopping or waiting. So I'll play that again. So you can imagine. Let's see if I can get it back to the beginning. He says, "I sure did see a lot of things that I never seen before."
I got to Kansas City on a Friday. By Saturday, I learned a thing or two.
Now, by now, he knows the key.
For up to then,
now
I
he can
didn't
sing.
have an idea of what the modern world was coming to. I counted 20 gas buggies going
Now
by
the song
themselves
builds.
almost every time I took
orchestra.
a walk. And then I put my ear to a Bell telephone, and a strange woman started in to talk.
What next?
Yeah, what next? Everything's up to date in Kansas City. They've gone about as far as they can go. They went and built a skyscraper 7 stories high, about as high as a building ought to grow.
Now, right there, I just like to throw in these little asides. Went and built a skyscraper. Sky is very high, right? This is not an accident. This is Richard Rodgers painting notes with his word, about as high as a building ought to grow, right? That it's like the notes are going higher as he's singing about the building growing. All the way through the score, there is this kind of attention to detail, and you can imagine that he didn't write that melody in a vacuum. He read Oscar Hammerstein's words, and Oscar Hammerstein made the comment about, or wrote the words about a skyscraper, about as high as a building ought to go. And what does he think? Well, then the melody should go up there. That stems from writing in that direction. There's another example that is similar. Let me figure out how to get back to the page. Here we go. There is the famous duet of Laurie and Curly, which is called, come on, it's a famous song, Surrey with the Fringe on Top. No, People Will Say We're in Love. There we are. Here we are. People will say we're in love. Now you're going to notice on this, there is a little intro, but I'll explain it in a second. So we have a couple of chords. And then Laurie says,
Why do they think up stories that link my name with yours?
Why do the neighbors chatter all day behind their doors?
I know a way to prove what they say is quite untrue. Here is the gist, a practical list of don'ts for you.
one of the most famous melodies.
Don't throw bouquets at me. Don't please my folks too much. Don't laugh at my jokes too much.
Love this.
People will say we're in love.
Those are all half steps. It's a very tricky thing for a singer. People will say we're in love, right? That's it's not an easy thing to sing. Anyway, the reason I bring that song up is that was another way in which they got from speaking to singing very quickly, and what they did is you would sneak, part of my job as the conductor, you sneak these chords underneath the dialogue. So they're speaking, they're still doing dialogue, they're still doing dialogue, they're still doing dialogue, and then she sings.
Why do they think
right? That it's kind of a sneaky way. No one waited for an intro. The audience probably doesn't even know the orchestra's playing, hopefully, right? You try to not draw attention to it. You try to just sneak in, and it gives her the pitch. The other example of this is an even simpler one, which is Ado Annie's song, Can't Say No, that's right. Which, by the way, is spelled C-A-I-N-T, Can't Say No. We've been having all kinds of discussions in rehearsal of how actually do you pronounce that. Is it can't? Is it can't? You know, there's a lot of opinions on that. Now you'll notice there's only one note here. Whoops. Okay, that was clearly not the right song. Hang on. Here we are.
It ain't so much a question of not knowing what to do. I knowed what's right and wrong since I've been 10.
So you notice that first note, again, that one oboe just sneaks in underneath the dialogue. You won't even hear it, but it gives her the pitch. Not much of an intro. And there she knows what key she's in, and she knows how to do it. But again, that's part of my job as a conductor of musicals, is to figure out how to sneak these things in so that it never feels like they have to stop. The worst thing in the world is when an actor is delivering a scene, they're in the moment, and then they have to stop, look at the conductor, get a cue, and go, right? That's what we try to avoid. And by the way, a word about the Ado Annie character. One of the things about Oklahoma is that all the shows in the 40s and 30s and this era required people with very trained voices, because sopranos especially, women singers tend to have 2 and often 3 what we would call distinct registers, right? A lower voice, a middle voice, and a higher voice. And most kind of more rock singers, pop singers, a lot of modern Broadway, they never really get above what we call the chest range or the belt range. But most opera singers go way higher into the head range, and there's kind of a mix range in the middle there, where the singer, as they're kind of going up, that's where they kind of put the clutch in, shift the gear, let the clutch out, right? It's kind of a whole thing. And the singers back then had to be able to do that. Laurie has to be a trained opera singer in order to really negotiate those ranges, and that's why it's harder and harder to find Lauries today. And I will say, Shireen Pimentel, who is our Laurie, you are in for a treat. She's really, really wonderful. And I just did West Side Story with her as Maria, and she's terrific. Anyway, the whole reason I bring this up is that Ado Annie is traditionally, if you imagine what Celeste Holm, who is the original Ado Annie, if you can think back to what that recording sounded like, believe it or not, Celeste Holm was a trained singer and had actually a beautiful voice. And she came in for her audition and sang so beautifully. And Richard Rodgers said to her, "Can you sing like you've never had a voice lesson?" And that's how she came up with the voice that she did for Ado Annie. And the way she got the job was, after he said that to her, she did a hog call on stage of the St. James Theater where they were having the auditions, and she got the job. So apparently, that falls under other skills on your resume if you can do that. Anyway, back to the idea, this integration idea of trying to integrate the dialogue with the music. it goes much, much further. And Richard Rodgers, another quote from Richard Rodgers, he said, "I have long held a theory about musicals. When a show works perfectly, it's because all of the individual parts complement each other and fit together. No single element overshadows any other. In a great musical, the orchestrations sound the way the costumes look." That's my favorite part. I'm going to say that again. The orchestrations sound like the costumes look. Like that is the gold standard, right? If you can get a show where the costumes, the sets, the lighting, the actors, the casting, and the way the orchestra sounds, if it all blends together, the orchestration sound the way the costumes look. That's what made Oklahoma work. All the components dovetailed. There was nothing extraneous or foreign, nothing that pushed itself into the spotlight yelling, "Look at me." It was a work created by many that gave the impression of having been created by one. And that, to me, the number one thing was the idea that they all checked their egos at the door, which you can imagine. Richard Rodgers had written 28 shows. Oscar Hammerstein wrote Showboat. Like, there could have been egos, right? And as I said, I just finished doing West Side Story, and you talk about egos. Those guys, right, you had Arthur Lawrence and Jerome Robbins and Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim. It must have been an absolute mess. And yet a brilliant piece came out of that too. But the idea of what makes Oklahoma so charming and so wonderful is that it feels honest. It feels like, as he said, nothing is pushing, yelling, "Look at me," right? There is not an extraneous note. We were talking in rehearsal yesterday, actually, about the fact that the score almost feels like Mozart at times, meaning that it is so pure, it is so simple, and also so exposed, which makes Mozart very hard, and nothing to hide behind. And that's the way Oklahoma works, is that there is really not an extraneous note. So there's a certain clarity, a certain simplicity, and there's no cynicism. You know, you go to a Broadway show nowadays, and very often the shows are performed kind of with a wink, kind of what we would call meta, or, you know, kind of making fun of musicals, making fun of, or show Spamalot, which I loved. But Spamalot has a whole bunch of songs about being in a musical. Why isn't my song longer, right? They're great songs. It's very funny. But Oklahoma is not that. And we tell the cast when they're working on it, we talk to them about, don't question it. Just go there completely and honestly. The characters all sing from the heart. This is one of my favorite examples of this kind of writing. There's a song that Laurie sings, which I really think is one of the most brilliant things in the show, and it's often overlooked. Let me find it here. Called "Many a New Day." And "Many a New Day," first of all, you talk about a song that is very hard for a trained voice to sing, because the melody, "Many a new day will please my eye," da-da-da-dum, right? That it jumps all over the place. I just said the words wrong. I am terrible with lyrics. The words are, well, before I tell you the words, what I want to say, what sets up this song is Laurie has just seen Curly walking off with Gertie Cummins, and that's bad news. Gertie is bad news. And, you know, Laurie and Curly have this kind of love-hate relationship, right? Will we, won't we? In fact, that first song, people will say we're in love, right? We can't pretend, we can't let on. So they're constantly kind of, you know, saying mean things to each other and pretending they don't. So Curly has just walked off with Gertie, and instead of an angry song or a rage song, which many composers would have written for this scene, for example, "I Hate Men," which is a very famous song from Kiss Me Kate, right? Instead of writing "I Hate Men," Rodgers and Hammerstein found a completely different way to go about this. And what she sings, here's the lyrics: "Many a new face will please my eye, many a new love will find me. Never have I once looked back to sigh over the romance behind me. Many a new day will dawn before I do." she approaches it with dignity, kind of with like, I'm not going to let this get me down. She's maybe building herself up a little. Grace in the face of disappointment, right? There's almost, and you'll hear the music, there's almost a classical dance, very light, elegant feel to it. And of course, she's singing all of this for all of the other women who are looking at her to see her reaction. So instead of getting mad and throwing something or slamming something, she sings this melody. This song does have an intro because she needs a minute to collect herself. There's a reason for it.
Why should a woman who is healthy and strong blubber like a baby if her man goes away, a weeping and a wailing how he's done her wrong? That's one thing you'll never hear me say. Never gonna think that the man I lose is the only man among men. I'll snap my fingers to show I don't care. I'll buy me a brand new dress to wear. I'll scrub my neck and I'll brush my hair and start all over again.
Now, before we get to the chorus, I'm going to pause it. First of all, you notice brush my hair. It's like wash that man right out of my hair. They're already thinking on the same levels that they wrote in a show a couple of years later. That was what we call the verse coming up to the refrain, which is really recitative aria, right? That was very conversational. That was very her laying out information. But now we get to the refrain of the words that I read to you.
Many a new face will please my eye. Many a new love will find me. Never have I once looked back to sigh over the romance behind me. Many a new day will dawn before I do.
So what my favorite thing about that is that little triplet. We call it a triple. The triplet, the ba-da-da-dum bum, because there's three notes within a beat, right? Da-da-da-dun dun. 1 2 3 1. Ba-da-da-dum bum. To me, it sounds a little like a hair flip. It's a little like, I don't care, I can't do it. I would try, but it's a little like, I don't care. Ba-da-da-dum, bum, whatever, right? There's this kind of, he could have written that melody anyway, but he wrote this many a new face will, and there's kind of an elegance, maybe even a little nervousness in it, but in those three notes, he tells you everything you need to know about how Laurie is feeling at that moment. There's grace, there's restraint, but then you notice the melody jumps around a lot, so I'm going to play that again. I'm trying to get to the right spot.
And start all over again.
So listen to how the melody leaps around. So little triplet.
Many a new face will please
Big
my
leap.
eye. Many a new love will
She comes back home.
me. Never have I once looked back to a sigh over the romance
Now this is,
behind.
maybe she's not sure.
Many a new day will dawn before
And she comes back home. It's a really complicated melody that sounds incredibly simple. And I've always been blown away by that he was able to write this melody that tells so many details and facets about her from that poem that Oscar Hammerstein gave him. And he was able to kind of get so much out of that. And at the end of every phrase, she kind of settles herself down and gets back to the tonic, and then you'll hear that the orchestra tells a different story because
Many a new face will please my
orchestra's very
eye.
elegant.
Many a new love will find me. Never have I once looked back to sigh over the romance behind me.
Now the orchestra's going to stamp their feet a little. They're like, damn it, I'm so mad at that guy.
Many a light lad may kiss and fly, a kiss on by his
Now look how far this is going away.
Never have I asked an August sky, where has last true
So that bridge takes us on a kind of a journey. I feel like when I'm listening to that, I'm like, where's it going to go? Where is it? And, you know, is she sure of what she's saying? Is she unsure, right? Actors think about all these things. And I think that Richard Rodgers was able to give Laurie this gift of, you know, if you're trying to portray this character, Shireen Pimentel, who is playing Laurie this week, or this summer, she's, you know, this gives her so much information to work with and allows her to kind of walk around in this elegant state, but yet be unsure, yet be nervous, right? So by the end of the song, she's kind of empowered. She's a little cheered up. She's really gone through a story by the end of the song. And you know, by the end, the other women join in and they sing with her. Now, this is a completely different example, talking about the character Judd a little bit. Judd is the very dark character, maybe the villain, maybe not the villain, because he's also somewhat of a victim in the show. There's a lot of frustration, and he sings a song called Lonely Room, where he is mad at the situation he's in, the room, the four walls. He lives in the smokehouse. He's the hired hand on Aunt Eller and Laurie's estate. And he has a song that the entire vocal melody is about that wide, right? It's just a few notes. It's trapped in this little range. It doesn't go very high. It doesn't go very low. It just kind of sits there. But to me, the thing that really tells Judd's story the most is the orchestra. If you listen to this opening, what you're going to hear are two clarinets playing at what is called a minor second. A minor second are the closest two notes can be to each other, right? So you have like a note, and they're both playing at the same time, kind of like it's, you know, pounding in his head, but very, very quietly, insistently. And at the same time, there is a viola tremolo, viola joke here. Do you know how you get a violist to play a tremolo? You write solo over their part, because then they get nervous. Sorry, I had to do it. Poor violists, they get the butt of all the jokes in the music world. But the violas have a tremolo, and they have a tremolo with what's called ponticello. Ponticello is when they play right next to the bridge. Pont is it comes from, is where the word bridge comes from, yeah. And so the bridge, if you play really close to that, you get kind of a buzzy, little nasal buzzy sound. And so you'll hear that as well. So while those clarinets are playing that dissonant sound, you also hear this zzz, like maybe there's a fly buzzing in his little smokehouse, right? And at the same time, you also have an effect of horns playing stopped. And a horn playing stopped is when a French horn player takes their hand, actually their fist, all the way up into the bell, and they basically cover where the air would come out with their hand. It's kind of like a mute, but it's much more extreme than a mute. And so it really stops the sound, and the only sound that comes out is like a buzz, okay? It's a very buzzy sound. So all of those sounds combined, fun fact, when they do that, it moves the pitch of the note, so they actually have to play a different note than what they have on the page. So if you write an F and you write stopped, they have to play a different note to get that F. I just learned that recently. Thought I'd share it. Anyway, this is, where did it go? Lonely Room. Let me turn it up a little because it's quite quiet.
The floor creaks.
So we'll listen to a little more in a second, but I just want you to really listen to that kind of creepy sound, which does not sound like Oklahoma, right? It's very different in color from what you expect from Oklahoma.
The floor creaks. The door squeaks. There's a field mouse nibbling on a broom. And I sit by myself like a cobweb on a shelf, by myself in a lonely room.
there's a moon in my window, and it slams down a beam across
Starts to have a little hope, so it rises.
The shadow of a tree starts a dancing on the wall, and a dream starts a dancing in my head. And all the things that I wish for turn out like I want them to be. And I'm better than that smart aleck cowhand who thinks he's better than me. And a girl that I want in a fray of my arms, and her own soft arms keep me warm. And her long yellow hair falls across my face, just like the rain in a storm.
And then we're back.
The floor creaks, the door squeaks, and the mouse starts nibbling on the broom.
So you can hear he's talking about like how horrible his space is, the mouse. But as soon as he starts talking about hope or a dream or I could get that girl, the music rises and then it just comes back to this stuck place. A couple of things about this song. The original Judd was Howard Da Silva, who is not a singer, not a trained singer. That was not Howard Da Silva. By the way, this recording that I'm playing, there's a really fascinating group out of London that has been recording all of the old classic Broadway musicals all the way through, which is very hard to find because before they started doing these things, because normally back in the 40s when they made the original Broadway cast albums, they were doing it on disc, on vinyl, and they had a limited time. So they would cut songs, they would cut dance music, they would, they weren't complete. So if you want to hear all the music, these modern groups have kind of done these recordings. But the reason I'm playing from this recording tonight is that on the original album, they also often added little intros to all these songs that I showed you how they didn't have intros. They added intros because they wanted them to be played on the radio and they wanted to make them more like a pop song. So the arrangements on the original cast albums and in the movie are quite different than what you see on stage. So anyway, Howard Silva was not a singer, so he had a very limited range. So that's partly another reason why, Rodgers had to write for the composers he had. And so the melody has this small range, which really works for Judd's character. But the song was actually cut from the show originally out of town because Howard Da Silva was not singing it well. And Alfred Drake, who was the original Curly, offered to help with his singing. So they went for a few months without playing Lonely Room in the show. And eventually they put the song back in because Alfred Drake, by the way, who was had been in operettas, he ended up being the original, I'm drawing a blank, Kismet and Kiss Me Kate, as well as Oklahoma. So he was a real singer, so he helped out Howard Da Silva, and they did add the song back into the show. However, what's interesting was when they did the first recording, the original Broadway cast recording, they didn't record the song because of time. They thought, well, that's the song that's least likely to be a hit song, so they actually left it off. A few years later, the show was still running on Broadway. They went back and recorded it, but Howard Da Silva had left the show by then. So if you listen to the original Broadway cast recording, it's actually Alfred Drake, who played Curly, singing Judd's song, making his voice sound more like Judd. Little piece of trivia there. I want to talk a little bit about what it's like to do these musicals at an opera house, because that is a thing that's happening more and more these days, right? That we take these shows that used to be the realm of Broadway theaters and we do them in the opera houses. And the first question is why? First of all, I already mentioned this, some musical theater singers aren't trained the way they were in the past, right? So there's a lot of musical theater singers that can't handle this material. It's just not right for their talents and their voices. Joan Roberts, who was the original Laurie, had sung in operettas. Alfred Drake, I mentioned. Celeste Holm, I mentioned. All of these people had somewhat of a trained voice. When it's done at an opera company, you get these glorious voices, right? You get the opportunity to have these, and nowadays I find that young singers also have dancing and acting it's amazing, opera singers nowadays, as opposed to 20, 30 years ago, they're all, they grew up in their high school musicals, they grew up dancing, it's a different cast, a different crop of singers now. So we actually are amazed at how many opera singers have these other talents that they can lend to us. If you did see Songbird a few years ago on the grass, and you remember, one of our opera singers actually tap danced, and we wrote that for him because I wrote to him and I said, hey, can you dance by any chance? And he wrote back and he said, I was a professional tap dancer on a cruise ship. And I was like, boom, you got a tap number. So now every poor baritone that gets cast to do Songbird has to tap dance, and I apologize for that. But anyway, my feeling is this, that when we look at the opera repertoire and you consider Handel and you consider Wagner and you consider Stravinsky and Berg, right, and Benjamin Britten, when you consider the range that we put as the opera umbrella, stretching that another half of an inch to include Rodgers and Hammerstein and Stephen Sondheim and Jerome Kern and people like that is really not that much of a stretch. In fact, there are many shows. Fiddler on the Roof would work wonderfully with opera singers and a big orchestra, and you get the big orchestra. You get all of these options. And so for me, the distance from Handel to Wagner is actually farther than the distance from Mozart to Rodgers and Hammerstein, right? Mozart to Oklahoma. So I feel like it's a wonderful fit. And also, as time goes on, the less these shows are going to be 8 shows a week on Broadway, just from a commercial, financial standpoint. So the Opera House, with our big orchestras, is a wonderful way to do these shows. I will say, speaking of the orchestra, that here at Glimmerglass, we have, for this show, I believe, a 45 to 50-piece orchestra. I don't have the exact numbers. Yeah, right? Incredible, right? And you get to hear, you're never going to hear the Oklahoma Overture sound like this, except in an opera house, right? The original Oklahoma on Broadway had, don't quote me on this, I know it's being recorded, I'm going to say a wrong number, but I think around 28 to 30 musicians in the orchestra. There's a very famous photo of Richard Rodgers conducting Oklahoma. He came in to conduct the 1,000th performance as kind of a celebration at the St. James Theater, and you can see they didn't even have a pit. They were literally, here's the stage, here's the orchestra, here's the front row of the audience. And Richard Rodgers is conducting, and the bass and the harp, they're all sticking up into the view of the stage. So they didn't have any, it didn't go under the stage like the pits do now. So they didn't have room for that many musicians. By the way, the story is that he added like an hour to the performance because he conducted so slowly. I don't know if that's true or not, but makes me feel better. Anyway, so having those resources of this kind of orchestra and a big chorus, if it's a show, right? This show, of course, one of the most famous moments. How do I get back to it? I'm going to have to skip a little in the song to get to the part, but you're going to know what I'm talking about.
They couldn't pick a better time.
Make it okay.
Here we go. You really need good singers to do this.
When we
So you can imagine how wonderful that sounds with a 45-piece orchestra and a big group of opera singers. And I can tell you, we already rehearsed that number. And it sounds incredible with these people. Very lucky to have such a wonderful group of singers. So I am firmly on team. Let's have opera companies do these musicals and do them justice and do them big and grand. And it's really a wonderful experience. Just real briefly, of course, I don't want to talk about Oklahoma without mentioning the dance music and the incredible thing that was also groundbreaking for its time, and that is, of course, the Dream Ballet. The Dream Ballet is a 15-minute or more ballet at the end of Act 1. So you don't even have any singing in the last 15 minutes of Act 1. You have this ballet in which Dream Curly and Dream Laurie interact, usually played obviously by different humans who come out and play their parts. Agnes DeMille did the original choreography. Interestingly enough, she was not known as a Broadway choreographer at that time, and it was a big chance to give her this. And apparently she worked in a different room all by herself because she and the director were not getting along, is the story. And also, Rodgers wasn't particularly interested in writing the music for the ballet, so the music was actually written between Robert Russell Bennett, who is the orchestrator, the pianist in the room, and Agnes DeMille. They would just say, we need 16 bars of Can't Say No, let's put that in there. And so it's kind of put together, but it works to be this wonderful, wonderful kind of arrangement and storytelling by dance. For Carousel later, Rodgers and Hammerstein actually hired what we nowadays call a dance arranger, a person that's their specialty of taking themes and putting them into a kind of a cohesive ballet. But the idea of telling the story through dance, of course, West Side Story did that 10 years later, but at this time, to really use serious dance to tell the story was a big deal. The other thing that was a big kind of a change is if you look at the Act 2 structure of Oklahoma, what's really interesting is that most people don't know this. There are only 3 songs in Act 2. All of Act 2 of Oklahoma only has 3 songs. The Farmer and the Cowman, All or Nothing, which is a duet between Will Parker and Ado Annie, and the song Oklahoma. There are a couple other things that are sung, but they are reprises of previous songs. The reason for that is that Act 2 has a much more serious, there's a big auction scene, it's a dramatic scene, it doesn't need music. There's the scene where Judd and Curly get into a big fight. These scenes are much more, it becomes a play almost for part of Act. In fact, I like to say that's my break. I've done all my work and then the end of Act 1 comes and then I get a nice break for Act 2. But anyway, it's a really interesting structure because Act 1 is full of so much music and dancing, and then Act 2 really gets serious and gets quiet and gets more kind of into the characters and into the story that we're telling. So it's a really interesting way to for them to tell the story. And as I said, it really changed a lot of how musicals were written after that. Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote another 6 or 7 musicals after that, of course. Most of them you know, King and I, Carousel, Sound of Music, of course. Seems like I'm missing a couple big famous ones, but you know what I mean. South Pacific, there we go, thank you. Exactly. And then Richard Rodgers actually wrote a couple of musicals with other writers as well after Oscar Hammerstein died. Oscar Hammerstein died very soon after Sound of Music opened. So anyway, I would love to answer any questions if anybody has any thoughts. Yes?
I have a question about rehearsing and about conducting.
Yeah.
So the ballet section, is it different as a conductor to be conducting singers versus conducting dancers?
Yes.
My one question. And my other question is, I know you mentioned that you're rehearsing. How is it for the performers? Because the orchestra's not here yet. I know that because I'm hosting one of them this summer.
Right.
And so how is the transition for them to be rehearsing I'm assuming it's like someone playing the piano.
That's right, yeah.
Versus rehearsing with an orchestra.
Yeah, so the first question was, how is it different conducting dance, right? And one of the big things with conducting dance is that you have to be very collaborative because there's only certain tempos only work for certain bodies, right? For example, ballet dancers, a shorter dancer will spin faster than a taller dancer, believe it or not. So there's certain things that they have longer legs, they have shorter legs, there's certain things that work, even transitions, like when they have to change from one tempo to another. Their bodies are all different, and every bit of choreography is different. So I work very closely with the choreographer, in this case, Eric Sean Fogel, who's done many, many shows here at Glimmerglass, and he and I work together all the time, and I'm constantly saying things like, oh, at that transition, what am I waiting for? Or how fast does that go? I'll tell you my little secret. My little secret is that I conduct dance music a little bit faster every rehearsal. This is true. Until they tell me that's too fast. And the reason is because they always like a kind of a practice tempo, but then that can kind of get solidified if you let it go too long. And so you end up in this kind of careful practice tempo. And so, and then they get used to that. And musically, you want to have a little excitement. You want to find so I try to find that edge. And then there's always a day, and this just happened with West Side Story too, there's always a day where they come in and go, is that a little too fast? And I'm like, okay, I found it. It's the spot. So that's the answer to that question, is it is very different, because with singers, you can hear when they need a breath, you can hear their voices. With dancers, it's a little different. I try to kind of watch their feet. I try to identify who the best dancers are in the group, because then I can watch them and know that if it looks good on them or doesn't look good on them, maybe I need to adjust the tempo. But it's very collaborative, for sure. The other question, the orchestra. Yes, absolutely. So we don't rehearse with an orchestra for the first 3 or 4 weeks. First of all, that would be unbelievably expensive to have, and plus we wouldn't have room for them. So we're in a room just with a person at a piano and the singers, and they can kind of work things out, right? Find the tempos, today we were even adding some harmonies in places that weren't there. We can work out all those details, all the dancing, and then what happens is in about 3 weeks, we add the orchestra. And first I rehearsed with the orchestra alone, and I'm able to go into those rehearsals kind of with the knowledge of now now I've worked with the singers, so I know they like to slow down here, they need a breath here, and I can kind of give that information to the orchestra. And we rehearse, and then we put it together. And the first rehearsal where we put it all together is called the Sitzprobe. Sitz meaning sitting, Probe is the German word for rehearsal. And so it's kind of like there's no action, there's nobody, it's just the singers stand there and the orchestra sits there, and we just go through it musically so they can kind of get used to what they hear. It can be a tricky transition depending on the piece, right? A show like Oklahoma, most everybody's heard it before. If you're doing a new piece and it's a new opera that's somewhat maybe avant-garde, somewhat relies on the orchestration, whereas the piano can't really imitate that, it can be very, very tricky. So if you're doing something like Mozart, it's not a huge transition. But if you're doing something like Pélias by Debussy, it's a huge transition to go from piano to suddenly this orchestral fabric, which sounds different. And the singers, of course, have to be kind of prepared that it's going to change things a little. And also, not to get too music geek on you, but the temperament in which a piano is tuned in is different than the temperament in which an orchestra plays in. So singers also have to adjust, and they have to realize that things that sounded a certain way on a piano might sound a little different tuning-wise when it's played by violins. So that's just an interesting, all of those things are things singers have to contend with. Yes?
I saw ballet dancers in square dance outfits performing to music from Oklahoma, and they were shooting a video to get the Uinta Mountains in the back.
Wow.
Because the parking lot was on a
That sounds cool, yeah.
And they were, so I, of course, witnessed this gorgeous staging. And I was told they were the Valentine dancers.
Uh-huh. They could have been.
I cannot find any record of this video. Or
Interesting. I don't know of it, but I mean, they could have been touring through or something like that, or the fact that, like you said, they wanted to make a video where you could see the mountains look a certain way. I mean, that wouldn't really look like Oklahoma. The mountains, it's kind of funny when you think about it, but it's, yeah. Well, what's so cool about doing shows like Oklahoma is that you do get this cross-section of people. You get actual ballet dancers and actual musical theater singers and actual opera singers kind of mingling in the same place where they normally wouldn't, you know what I mean? And I mean, West Side Story is a similar way. You need ballet trained dancers to pull that off. And one of the things I love about Glimmerglass is that, you know, they have all these opera singers, but they also have a core group of what we call MT people, musical theater people. And these musical theater people, they're there to do the big dances in Oklahoma and to kind of play these characters and do these things, but they also end up in the chorus of Madame Butterfly, right? But they've never sung, they have to learn Italian. They've never sung in Italian. But in the same token, the opera singers are now dancing in Oklahoma, which they've never done. So by the end of the summer, this happens every summer I'm here, what's really cool is to see how these groups kind of learn from each other. You see the musical theater dancers looking at the opera singers going, how do you sing like that? And you see the opera singers looking at, how do you move like that? Or how do you act like that? I mean, we have a woman in the show here, Holly Twyford, who is playing Aunt Eller, who is an actress. Right? She's not a singer, she's not a dancer, but she is a fantastic actress. That is her thing. And just to see everyone in the room kind of watching her work and watching, like, you know, opera singers, acting is the second thing on their resume. Dancers, acting is the second thing on their resume. But to watch a real actor, that's a masterclass for them. So it's really, Glimmerglass is one of those rare places where all these people kind of come together and you get this kind of, you know, learning from each other, you know. Yeah, any other questions? Yes?
Being a transitional musical, when it first opened, what were the critics' responses and what was the audience response?
What were the audience's responses to this when it opened, and the critics' responses? I mean, aside from the one jerk that said no legs, no chance or whatever, I honestly, the reports I heard were that it opened on whatever night, and the next day there were lines around the block for tickets. That it was, you know, it was a shocking overnight success. And of course, they wouldn't have known that because it was the first collaboration with Rodgers and Hammerstein. And I think they felt, you know, trepidatious of how are people going to receive this cowboy musical. And I think it was an immediate smash hit, and it ran for years. I mean, it ran for over 1,000 performances, and then of course it went on tour, and then they made a movie and all of that. So I do think it was immediately a success, unlike a lot of things like Madame Butterfly, which was a big flop. And you know, there are many pieces in the repertory that are not immediate successes, but I think Oklahoma was. And I believe that the critics, I think, loved it. I mean, look, the song Oklahoma is now the state song of Oklahoma. Like, that is unbelievable, right? That you would write a song for a musical and it literally became the state song. And when you think that Richard Rodgers kind of did that twice, because the song in Sound of Music that everyone thinks is the national anthem of Austria is Edelweiss, which, by the way, is not the national anthem of Austria, and the Austrians get really mad if you mention that to them. There was a famous story of, I think it might have been Nixon, I'm not sure who, some head of state American said to a visiting Austrian diplomat, like, they played Edelweiss and said, oh, we've got your song, and it became a bit of an international scandal in the 70s, back when that could be an international scandal. But anyway, yes, it was an immediate hit, and to have a song, you know, to have that kind of ability to write songs that were that perfect for the moment and that rousing was really amazing for Richard Rodgers to do that. Yeah. Any others?
Well,
Yes.
Why
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. You know, so many musicals put the exclamation point, like Oliver, right? It's not Oliver, it's Oliver. You know, the original title of Oklahoma for a long time, while they were writing it, was Away We Go. Which also had an exclamation point, I believe. Away we go. It's based on a play called Green Grow the Lilacs, which was a play by Lynn Riggs. And I think that when they had the title Away We Go, I think there were a lot of people that were like, that's not really telling the story. That's not really. But then I'm just as me surmising. I think if you look at the word Oklahoma and you think it's a musical, what is this show? It's about, okay, it's about people out west, but you put an exclamation there and it suddenly sounds like, oh, it's a musical, right? And so that's a good question. I don't know why the exclamation point. Yeah. Well, for sure. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you at the show. I should probably have the dates ready in my head, but I don't know. Okay, there's brochures out there.
Yeah. No, when I was a kid, I enjoyed Oklahoma, but all of this background is just wonderful. And you did something that I've wanted folks to do, is talk a little bit about the conducting. And I really like the question about dancing, because, so this is wonderful. So anyway, plan to attend Talking Opera next Wednesday again. And Kelly Kuo, who spoke to us when he was conducting Elizabeth Cree, and who is a graduate of this wonderful training program that we have at Glimmerglass, is going to talk with us about fellow travelers. You passed Bill and Cynthia signing people up for the meet and greet, and Ernie is selling tickets for the appreciation concert. And the barn sale is this weekend and the following weekend, and I guess whenever they can catch John and Rita in between. And
It says every day. Yes.
every day, yeah. No, I know. I have a few flyers for the youth opera where you will see James Lowe. Now, you didn't tell us his son, Owen Lowe, but what's his role? I mean, is he Robin? Is he the star?
He's not Robin. I'm not sure what his role is. He's in the ensemble, but I don't know what
Okay,
he plays.
okay.
If you saw Robin Hood first time they did it many years ago, he was the little guy, because he was in it then, and now he gets to reprise. He gets to be in it again, but he doesn't get to play that role again. He was told.
He's too tall?
Taller than me now.
Yeah. So anyway, hope to see you all next week, and bring some other people, and watch the recording and share the recording, and good night.
Thank you.
This was wonderful.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad.